When a rose fails to bloom, we don't blame the flower. Instead, we change the environment it tries to grow in to offer the best opportunity for another rose to bloom in the future. In our society, however, we are often all too quick to blame the flower, ignore the ground it grows in, and do no more than heap metaphorical fertilizer upon it, removing further onus from ourselves. What if we are the rose? What if we lose our concept of the fact we are even a flower? Is it fair or just to expect us to know we are a product of the soil we are rooted to? Now substitute the rose for a human life, the bloom for a rational, logical, controllable state of mind, the ground for our systems and society, and tell me if you can see where we need to water this mess. When someone is losing their grip on reality, knows enough to recognize this, calls out for help, and is lost between the cracks within our system, disaster can occur and blame its usual byproduct. They say those who are not willing to face the wrath of the thorn should never seek to grasp the rose. We certainly welcome the thorn to uncover the rose here on the next episode of Just Lawful.
Adelaide is the perfect place to set a horror story. You know why all those films and books are always set in sleepy conservative towns? Because sleepy conservative towns are where those things happen. Exorcism, omens, shining, poltergeists. Adelaide is Amityville or Salem, and things here go bump in the night.
Welcome again to Just Lawful, where things do indeed go bump in the night. My name is Daniel Panozzo, and I am once again, as always, joined by my co-host, Sean Fuster.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you, Daniel.
Absolutely. Before we begin, of course, a huge thank you to everyone who has been listening and continues to listen. If you haven't heard our previous episodes, we would strongly recommend and, of course, greatly appreciate you going straight over to whatever platform you choose, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you hear this, and subscribe, leave us a 5-star rating, comment, do all of those things, whatever they will allow you to do on that platform that will help us get our work out to the masses and to those who might really benefit from hearing our message. For this episode, similar to our last, if you do find anything that we discuss that may be distressing, or you have someone who you know who may be in a vulnerable mental state, please make use of the following support resources. From the South Australian Government Mental Health Triage Service on 131 465. They're a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service. They provide advice and information on mental health emergency and crisis situations. The other one is the Acute Crisis Intervention Support Line on 131 466. If you have someone that you know or feel maybe in a vulnerable situation, they can call on your behalf and they can help to guide them and assist them through that time in their life as well.
And as we've said previously on the show, reaching out for help when you need it is never a sign of weakness. Reaching out for help when someone else needs it could be one of the greatest things you ever do.
Absolutely. We are going to continue in the same vein as our last episode. In our last episode, you may remember, we spoke about a situation where, due to a mental break, an incident occurs. And off the back of that, the family of this person who, and please, Sean, correct me on the correct way to enunciate this, the person who was the cause of the situation yet not held responsible for mental incapacity.
That's right, when someone is found not guilty of a crime by reason of mental incompetence.
That's the one.
The incident occurred. It would have been a crime had the person been mentally well, but because they lacked the cognitive ability to understand their actions were criminal, they are found not guilty, and instead of being sent to prison, they are given a limiting term, a period under mental health supervision that would be the same length as the jail term a mentally well person would have received.
Absolutely. We also asked you on our last episode to grab a blank canvas and your paints and start to think about a brand new way to paint the picture as we move through this concept of mental health butting up against and intersecting with our legal system. we're going to ask you to do that once again. We want you to grab a brand new canvas because this one is going to challenge the concept we saw from our last episode in a very different way. As I say, last episode, we had a family saying we love this member of our family. However, we do not want this person released because we still feel they are dangerous.
And in this situation, we have the ultimate nightmare scenario when your normal life, your normal family existence is completely upended and interrupted by someone else not connected to you who is enduring a mental illness.
We are indeed, and this one's going to challenge what we think we already know, fair to say. And I guess there's no easy way to do this, but Sean, how do we start this situation off?
So we start this situation off on October 25th, 2018, south of Adelaide at a place called the Colonnades Shopping Centre, Noarlunga Centre.
Mm-hmm.
Police are called because a woman has been found killed. Now, there's no way to sugarcoat this. Lying dead face down in a pool of her own blood outside of a shopping centre.
Mm-hmm.
She'd been found by a passerby, a man named Chris Graham, who was on his bicycle. He was on his way to use the ATM, withdraw some cash. He saw the woman and he said, "At first I didn't know if it was a man or a woman or if it was a setup. When I saw the blood, I realised it was pretty serious. I rolled her over and I tried to stop the bleeding, but really, it was no use. I'm sorry that I couldn't do any more. I've got a child myself and I couldn't contemplate that happening to her. I keep thinking if I had just been here 15 minutes earlier, but I can't think like that." What a incredibly confronting, sobering situation. Just riding your bike in the middle of the night. This is about 12:01 a.m. Grab some cash and that's what you're confronted by.
Right off the bat, Sean, this is one of those situations where this is a peripheral character, if you like, in this story. However, this person has come along into this situation and has had their life changed forever. By no way and no means being involved in this situation, yet will be forever challenged, changed, and possibly scarred by this moment.
And the moment that followed it, because as Mr. Graham is on his knees trying to staunch the bleeding somehow, trying to perform CPR, trying to just effect some kind of positive change for this complete stranger, a second complete stranger, a young man, walks up behind him, looks down and says, "Oh, I did that."
Wow.
And Mr. Graham just, "I'm sorry, like, what? What do you mean you did that?" And the man responds, "Oh, I did that," and sits calmly down and just watches what's going on with no real connection, no real effect. So, of course, Mr. Graham gets out his phone and calls police, and this young man just sits there the entire time, watching the whole thing happen. The police come and handcuff him. He doesn't offer any resistance. He's just quietly led away. Mr. Graham said later, "I find it hard to believe that these two people, the suspect and the victim, aren't related to each other in some way, given the hate and anger it would be necessary to cause that sort of injury. But when the police brought him in handcuffs, he was quite calm and subdued. It was surreal. It's sad that someone has so little respect for someone else's life." Now you can see why you would make that connection.
Yes.
What an incredibly hollow comment to make. I did that.
Yeah.
Not even, I did that, they deserved it, or finally I've avenged myself, or they were asking for it. The sort of things that we've heard on this show time and time again. Think of some of the more bizarre justifications we've had from people like Ziola Abrahimzadeh. She brought this upon herself. When someone is coming for your reputation, you have to destroy them. Think of some of the defenses that we've heard, like Reese Watherston saying, "He was so big, I had to throw the punch with all the force I had in my body."
Yeah.
There's always a reason, there's always a rationale, whether we agree with it, whether we don't, whether it's a defense, whether it's not. Not something as small as, "I did that."
And with that statement, "I did that," and as you said, none of the emotion, none of the venom, none of the vengeance, any of those things. This is where that typical Hollywood trope comes in, where you would say, who in their right mind would say something like that?
And that's exactly why we're here, because this is what the police had to grapple with straight away. SA Police Detective Chief Inspector Scott Fitzgerald said the nature of the head injuries were among the most severe that he had seen, and quite significant. but no weapons were used.
So that's another point there. No weapons in this. This is
Bare hands.
fists, hands.
Feet.
Yeah.
It would later turn out that it was also concrete.
Wow.
The actual substance beneath this person, who by this point they had figured out was a woman.
Sure.
Tragically. Detective Chief Inspector said, "This murder of a mother is a shocking and tragic event. Our thoughts are with the family. This is a tragedy where a mother of 2 was murdered in our community. We are currently looking at the motive. However, at this stage, both parties are unknown to one another, and we're not certain of what the motive is."
So far, this has got to be, it's a horrific, violent crime. It appears they don't know each other. A cold, calculated sense of, I did that, with no other emotion involved. This does not fit the usual profile of a crime or a situation that I guess bystanders, police, anyone comes across in this situation.
Especially contrasting it with the amount of force, venom, energy, whatever word you want to put behind it, necessary to deliver that much damage to a human body with bare hands.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a frenzy thing. That's a very state of arousal kind of thing. And I'm not talking sexually here. I mean emotional arousal. There is something behind that is fueling that force.
Indeed, as you say, that kind of, I guess, impact and then outcome on someone in this sort of sense is generally, say, for the realm of someone who is in a frenzied sort of emotional love-hate state, or a vengeance state. Certainly a huge amount of emotional outpouring is generally what causes this kind of attack and this kind of damage to another human being.
Another facet to this whole thing that the Detective Chief Inspector revealed was that the suspect, the man who'd been arrested, the man who said, "I did that," had been hanging around the shopping centre from 7 p.m. that night. Several hours just hanging around. So the woman who had died had been there for a shorter period of time, yet this man had been there for hours upon hours without incident. And then for some reason, round about midnight, it turns into this just before the cyclist finds them.
Fascinating so far, Sean. So many elements to this and so many, I want to say loose ends, but they're not even ends yet. I'm not sure what this looks like, and we don't even have strands to create a tapestry yet. This one is fascinating. Sean, a moment ago, I called this fascinating, and it is all of those things, and it's intriguing, and I'm not even sure what I need to be asking at this point, but right now, who are we actually talking about?
It would take several months to find out. You'll remember this incident occurred October 25th, 2018. By March 27th, 2019, we finally had our answers.
Wow.
The lady who had died was Michelle Stephanie Foster, a mother of 2 from Ethelton, which is a suburb nowhere near the Colonnades shopping centre.
Absolutely not, no.
Colonnades is in the south. Ethelton is, if memory serves, in the west.
Yeah.
So she was nowhere near home at the time.
No, it is a good, fair chunk of distance between those 2 locations.
Mother of 2, leaving behind some beautiful, beautiful children. The man was a man by the name of Jaden Tane Lower. He's a very, very young man too, only 20 years old, of no fixed address.
Okay.
He was, of course, charged with 1 count of murder.
Sure.
He appeared in the Adelaide Magistrates Court, and we heard very much the same allegations that we'd heard at the time of the incident, that Ms. Foster had sustained severe and significant head injuries, no weapons were used. It seemed to me on that day in the Adelaide Magistrates Court that a bit of back-of-house dealing had already started between prosecution and defence.
How so? How did you come to that sort of understanding?
Well, the prosecution felt they had to be at pains to confirm they would still be pursuing a murder charge.
Okay.
And defence were at pains to confirm that they would be seeking to assess their client's mental competence before he was asked to enter a plea. Now, this is where we get into sort of the hoodoo and the voodoo of being in courts for a very long time. When someone insists on something, when someone is really putting their point across to a magistrate, actually, let me take that back one step.
Okay.
A magistrate sits and hears anywhere between 50 and 300 cases a day.
Wow.
The magistrates' court's a cattle call court. Things just move through.
Yeah.
Magistrates do not have intimate knowledge of a situation.
Mm-hmm.
They only know what happens when someone steps and tells them. So almost like a ticket counter at a supermarket.
Mm-hmm.
You know, case 375, Jaden Tain lower. Lower comes up on the video screen. Prosecution, defence walk up and sit down in front of the magistrate. The magistrate, in this case Simon Smart, only knows what he's about to be told.
Okay.
So if prosecution is at pains to tell Mr. Smart, we are still pursuing a murder charge,
Mm-hmm.
and defence is at pains to say, well, before anybody asks us for a guilty or not guilty plea, we're going to go to a psychologist.
Yep.
It means everyone's expecting the magistrate to say, right, so are we ready to move on?
Okay.
The magistrate's court is a court of summary jurisdiction. It's supposed to keep matters moving, not supposed to sit there forever.
Mm-hmm.
If this is a murder trial, great. Can we get it to the Supreme Court as quickly as possible, please? This is the equivalent of saying, well, pump the brakes, Your Honour. We want more time.
Sure.
The reason I thought there had been backstage dealing is if everybody was on the same page about this, if everybody agreed that this was a mental health case already, the magistrate would be told that.
Okay.
For the prosecution to say, we still insist this is murder, it means that they're not there yet.
Right.
They're not prepared to concede the mental health element yet.
Okay.
And defence is insisting it's already there. I don't know this for a fact, but I have visions of letters going back and forth, emails saying, our client's really unwell, this is a Section 269 case.
Sure.
Well, you can say that, says the prosecution, but we're not going to accept that yet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're going to get reports, we'll see you in court. That
Okay.
had that kind of feel to it.
Look, the fact that they've both come with, I guess, an expectation, understanding of that was the case they were putting forward, it certainly sounds like they both knew what each other was about to do.
That's right.
So,
That's
sure.
right.
Makes sense.
The person who wasn't clued in on all of that, though,
Yeah.
was Michelle's mother.
Okay.
So Michelle's mother, Andrea, was there.
Okay.
Lovely lady. Silver hair, had a large group of family and friends with her, and she was very upset. Very upset that things weren't moving fast. I have a bit of an issue when it comes to speaking to members of family at this stage in the process. You remember when we covered the Hillier case?
You've mentioned this in the past. Yeah.
I said this is the time to leave people alone. But Andrea Foster was very much wanting to speak to the media. She wanted to understand why there'd been no plea. She wanted to understand why this was going to be adjourned off again. She had no concept, as so many people lack a concept when they get into this situation. She's not there through any fault of her own.
And this is that classic example we talk about where these are people who are not normally thrust into this system, this world, this, I guess, whole sort of stratosphere of ideas and concepts and moving, shuffling, all these pieces. They don't understand this because they've never had to be exposed to this.
And this is what Andrea said to me outside of court. She said, people need to accept each other's differences and know that it's wrong to hurt another person. They need to be taught that it's wrong to hurt another person. I just want to say that there was no reasons, no excuses for the violence that happened to my daughter. There was no excuses for any kind of violence, and she wasn't doing something to somebody to hurt them. She didn't deserve it. She didn't deserve any of that. My heart broke for her. Here is, again, we've already figured out Ethelton, Colonnades, they're nowhere near each other. She's a mother of two. She's on her own in the middle of the night. To be really blunt for a moment, things looked bad. There are unanswered questions swirling around. People are going to make automatically negative assumptions about Michelle.
Yeah.
I'm pleased to say there is no reason for any of those negative assumptions. So let me give you a slight spoiler right now.
Sure.
But you could see where she was coming from.
And certainly the sentiment of her words coming across, she's right.
Yeah.
Her daughter didn't deserve this. No one deserves this. People should be held to account if they are the doer of these deeds. And you can absolutely understand that emotional outpouring that comes through in her words about what this situation looks like right now.
And then the break. Apparently this court process is a long process, and it's a sad one for all of us, she said. We will have to go through all of this before we get any kind of relief, and we never actually will get any kind of relief. My daughter's children miss her so badly, and it's so wrong to make this go on for so long. But I will be there every time and in the end to make sure my daughter has some justice.
And look, to her credit in that sense, all she's asking for at that point is justice.
Yeah.
So,
but what shape does justice take?
This is the thing.
Because we're already looking down the barrel of a 269 case here.
And that's the thing. And again, if the complexity of being thrust into this world of the legal system, navigating the grief and the turmoil of your daughter, and, the mother of your grandchildren having her life tragically taken like this for inexplicably no reason. Now you've got this concept that we're going to have to go through this process to understand what is 269, mental health. Hang on, this is now spiraling miles out of anything that we are even possibly able to comprehend at this stage.
And there's another layer of cruelty to this as well. As everything's going on behind the scenes to figure out who, what, and why Jaden Tane Lower is, Michelle Foster's life is the only life that's on public display.
It seems so cruel and so unfair and so unjust at this time.
Absolutely. What we learned was that Michelle was actually making her way to a relative's house at the time.
Yeah.
She had stopped off at the shopping centre to change buses.
Oh,
There's a bit of a transit centre there. There's a train station,
there is,
a few other places.
Absolutely, yeah.
She was on her way from one situation in her life to another. Nobody wants to be travelling at that time of night, but everybody's got the right to be safe no matter what time of night they're travelling. Of course. And especially at a well-lit shopping centre right by the ATMs where there's going to be security cameras It's a bank.
Yeah.
There's going to be security cameras everywhere. She had every reason to think that she could travel from Ethelton down south with no hassles, no heartache, and certainly not with this kind of fate.
Yeah. And that transit centre you talk about is not a small one.
No.
Trains, buses, a whole lot that goes on through that all hours. And, I mean, yes, that's getting probably toward the end of the service for the evening, but you are not going to necessarily feel unsafe at that space.
And also, if public transport is your only way of getting from place to place, and it's the last bus of the night, then you're on the last bus of the night. That's simply the way things are.
Yeah. So let's try and recap so far. We know there's a horrific incident. We know that a gentleman comes along to try to make this better. The man on his bike. We have a man who has said, "I did that." Very coolly, calmly. We moved this process through. We've identified the victim as Michelle. Michelle's mum, Andrea, has had a really public outpoint at this stage going, I don't know what's next. I just know this is going to be a long ride. Where does this ride take us from here?
It's a lengthy ride because there were multiple hearings after that of a very similar nature. Your Honour, we need more time. We're not ready to go to the Supreme Court yet. There's some frustration on behalf of several magistrates, Mr. Smart in particular. He tended to hear this case again and again.
Okay.
And of course, then that's building up in him. Well, this is the third or fourth time you've been before me. What's taking so long?
Yeah.
My job is to get you to the Supreme Court. Is there or is there not a case to answer? Now, let's talk about that concept for a minute. If you as a defence lawyer say, my client's going to plead not guilty, that's great, but is there a case to answer? Has the evidence that's been put before you by the prosecution risen to a level where a jury should be called in to consider it? In this case, Lower's counsel weren't even prepared to concede there was a case to answer.
Okay.
They were stymieing everything. And it seemed nonsensical.
Okay.
To all of us journalists that were turning up time and time again, I've gone back through my diary. There's a lack of articles I've written about this matter and a whole heck of a lot of diary notations because it just kept coming back with no progress, back with no progress, time and time again. Finally, June 23, 2020.
So just give us a time cap. We're now talking how many years?
From October 25th, 2018 to June 23, 2020.
So we're talking, a year and a half, 2 years. Yeah, okay.
Better part of.
Yeah, right.
We finally get to the Supreme Court.
Okay.
And strangely, instead of going to the usual Supreme Court building, the hearing is going to be held in the original Supreme Court building.
Okay.
So South Australia has two buildings that house the Supreme Court.
Yes.
The main building, as I'll call it, has cell access.
Okay.
There are cells underground, elevators that lead up to every courtroom. The defendant will appear physically in the dock and is there for the matter. To be sent across the road to the older Supreme Court building means that they're only going to appear by video link.
Right.
They're not going to be physically present.
Okay.
That was my first clue that the worm had turned and we were definitely in the grounds of a 269 case.
So at this stage, there had been enough progress made behind the scenes, whatever that may have been, that now we're going to move somewhere. But it's a very different and interesting circumstance how we've got here so far.
Daniel, it's a very odd thing to be sitting in a courtroom that you associate with lawsuits and civil proceedings, and yet be in the midst of a very nasty murder case,
Mm.
especially when I heard what I heard next.
Okay.
So prosecution and defense stood up and effectively announced together that mutually it had been agreed that they were going to accept a plea of not guilty to murdering Michelle Foster by reason of mental incompetence. Jaden Tain Lower, they said, had entrenched schizophrenia.
Okay, and both sides were agreeing on this.
They'd reached the point
Okay.
at long last, after all the backroom, looked like my theory was correct, the backroom dealings, and I hate to phrase it that way, someone's going to tell me off for that.
The toing and froing.
The toing and froing, the conversations had happened, the reports had come through, and what a report. I've heard a lot of 269 reports over the years. We talked in previous episodes about how they are all brought together, but listen to this. Again, I'm going to read you my article of June 23rd, 2020, because it is the best summary. The man who killed Michelle Stephanie Foster had the bizarre, grandiose, and persecutory belief that he lived in a simulation and she was an artificial intelligence. Lower, by this point 22 years old, believed killing Michelle would free him from mind control and reunite him with his original parents on another planet. He was paranoid, predisposed to extreme anger, and believed he was the chosen one being persecuted by the purported simulation's architects. On the night in question, he had planned to kill either himself or another person to end the simulation, that he'd had amicable interactions with Miss Foster at first, and then the killing had happened spontaneously.
Okay, so you said that you've heard a lot of 269 reports come together, and this was something different again. Sean, if I didn't know you and your credibility in this sense, I would be saying, what on earth are you reading to me that is nonsensical, that is preposterous? This person thought they were in a simulation, artificial intelligence, and they needed to kill this person to release themselves to go back to their parents. I would be looking at you going, what on earth are you talking about?
Well, it sounds like the movie The Matrix, doesn't it?
Those
of us that are familiar with that, the whole idea that reality is a simulation created by machines and that you are in a persecutory state, the idea of a chosen one is very much prominent in that film. This is what is so confronting about Jaden Tain Lower's case. So here he is walking around the world every day believing that everything around him is a creation, a simulation, a virtual reality computer program. And it's all designed to persecute him.
Yeah.
So the guy that cuts him off the street, designed to persecute him. The man that yells at him, designed to persecute him. The woman who refuses to serve him at the pub, designed to persecute him. He also believed that this simulation was testing his purity. And if he in any way, shape or form broke the moral bounds by having premarital sex, getting involved in drugs, getting involved in anything, that the simulation would further punish him and separate him from his real parents for longer.
Okay.
He believed he couldn't show any weakness, any empathy, any sympathy toward another human being, because if he did, the simulation would double down and make his life even worse.
I just want people to stop for a second and just listen to what Sean just said. And look, I'm hoping for the majority of us, we're sitting here in a sane, logical, rational mindset. Just try and imagine living in a state like that for 5 minutes, let alone the entirety of every waking minute of every day. What sort of, just mental anguish, stress, and just discombobulation must that person have been living with?
It's a walking horror show.
Yeah.
And that's what was affecting me greatly. We've talked on the show before that I have my mental health issues.
And
to think that, my days are bad some days. There are days, and you know this, I've messaged you about this. There are days where I get up and I say, I just cannot face the world today. My brain has turned inward on me. My anxiety is acting on me.
Yeah.
Everything's going to go wrong if I step outside the door.
Yeah.
That's bad enough, let me tell you, without, if I step outside the door, the simulation is going to go out of its way to ruin me and break me today so that I can never see my parents again. The level of mental torment that pours upon a person, I can't even fathom it.
So with that said, and I appreciate you being vulnerable to let all of us understand that from your perspective, what effect did having that diagnosis and report about Jaden have on you having to sit in the court and hear that?
It was really confronting and really hard to listen to. I was feeling a lot of sympathy and empathy toward a person that I didn't expect to. Now, none of this in any way, shape, or form excuses his conduct.
No.
He has still taken an innocent life.
Correct.
A woman, Michelle Foster, a mother of two, who has done absolutely nothing to deserve it. In fact, what the prosecution surmises, and this is not proven because there's no way to prove this, but they surmise that in the period between Michelle Foster and Jaden Lower meeting each other and Jaden killing Michelle, Michelle probably showed a moment of human connection and sympathy to Jaden. Remember, she was making her way from one place to another. He'd been lurking around for several hours. She might have said thank you. She might have, touched him on the shoulder. Thanks very much. Given him a smile. And that's what's triggered, oh no, this is the simulation trying to take me down again.
Yeah.
Because he'd reached the flashpoint. He was prepared to kill himself if necessary to end the simulation. But in that moment, his disordered mind thought, well, if I kill her, I'll win.
Yeah.
I'll win the game.
Yeah.
So there is no excuse for that.
No.
But there is so much understanding for me in that moment.
Yeah.
The level of brutality involved makes an odd kind of sense to me in that moment. The circumstances, the standing there looking, saying, I did that. That makes perfect sense. If you think you've just won the video game.
Now it makes sense, doesn't it?
You've just, you've finished the game.
Correct.
So you're not going to react negatively to everything that goes around you because as far as you're concerned, the simulation's going to end any second now. These cops arresting me, they'll fade away any second now.
Yeah.
The cyclist looking at me covered in blood, he'll go away any second now. I've got no reason to be panicked anymore. I've spent all this time till now being panicked.
Yeah.
I'm calm now because it's all going to be over.
And as I said, that statement now makes sense when you take it out of the vacuum that it was set in and put it in this context. So we've heard the report, and that's how you reacted, responded, and emotively felt about it. What about Michelle's mum at this stage?
Before I tell you what Andrea felt, we have to go into the next phase of the report.
Oh, okay. Sure.
And there's a reason for that. And a lot of people out there right now listening, love you all listeners, but I'm sure some of you are right now saying, well, why did he let himself get to that state? Why did his family let him get to that state? Why didn't somebody do something? Somebody tried to do something. Somebody tried to do something for 22 years.
Okay.
And that somebody was Jaden Lower.
Right.
Because as prosecutor Carmen Matteo made clear in court, Lower had gone to doctors consistently. He had been looking for help since he was a child to try to understand why he had these thoughts and feelings. In prosecutor Carmen Matteo's words, Jaden had been repeatedly misdiagnosed and his thoughts and feelings wrongly blamed on drugs since he was 15, resulting in numerous lost opportunities to help him and therefore prevent Miss Foster's death. When he was a teenager, Lower had an episode and tried to kill his father. Just 6 weeks before killing Miss Foster, he had attacked two strangers to, and I quote, prevent the world from descending into chaos. After attacking those people, and here's something that's going to sound familiar. Remember I told you about the couple? The very start of all this, the man stabbed his wife, walked into the nearby officers and said, please arrest me, I've just killed my wife. After Jaden attacked those two people to prevent the world descending into chaos, he walked into a hospital and warned doctors he was feeling homicidal and needed help.
Okay.
The doctors sent him home and said, keep taking your medication, you'll feel better.
Okay. And look, that right there feels like a gross I don't say underdiagnosis, but just underwhelming response to someone who has come to you in that state. And I don't know the whole circumstance around that situation.
Oh, look, there's more. There are incidents of Jaden going to inpatient
Sure.
treatment and sitting there and saying, I need help, I'm going to kill someone if you don't help me.
Yep.
Two nurses would see him and one would say, okay, stay right there, we'll be back. They'd both leave him. 5 minutes later, he was gone.
Yeah, okay.
He needed someone to sit with him and keep him there in that sane space.
Yeah.
He grabbed at a rational straw for just a few minutes, enough to go get help. I mean, I get angry when I talk about this one because in that moment, listening to all of this as the prosecutor's laying it out, I'm thinking to myself, this is the sort of thing you hear in a coronial inquest.
Yeah, okay.
This could have been
Sure,
prevented
sure.
so many times.
Yeah.
Not only that, but this 22-year-old
Yeah,
could have not been living in this walking horror show for as long as he has.
absolutely. This definitely does put a different perspective and a slightly different lens and wrinkle, if you like. We're now talking about someone who, as you said, clutched very sparingly at grasping that straw of reality every now and then, and actually trying to get treatment for themselves, recognizing they needed help, actually reaching out to the right places to try and get that. And for whatever reason, just every time, just missing that, not being able to be held in that space to actually get the support, the treatment, the advice, the guidance, just someone to actually be able to acknowledge the situation and try to assist through that process. So,
and we're looking at systemic issues as well. Those two nurses were probably dealing with several dozen other people.
and that
in
is
that
exactly
moment.
right. And that's what I meant before. Yeah.
Sending him home to trusting him to take his medication.
Correct.
We don't have a bed for you right now. Please go home and keep taking your medication.
So the best we've got it. That's it. Well, you're on medication. Great. Keep doing the medication. So I appreciate you saying that, because that was what I was saying before. We don't know all the circumstances, but what else could we have done? We don't know. However, we know he attempted and he slipped through those cracks.
And you say slip through the cracks. You asked me how Andrea reacted. She told me outside of court that Lower had fallen through the cracks of the state's mental health system. He told mental health workers he was going to kill. If that was not a red flag, what is? When does the system stop and see he's been like this since he was 15, that he wanted to kill his father, that he was going to kill somebody? Since this man was a child, he's needed help, but nobody gave it, and so he killed. Someone didn't do their job, and my child suffered because of that. That's an incredibly caring, empathetic, and insightful comment.
Yeah.
Somebody suffered because someone else didn't do their job. It's not that Jaden Lower alone killed my daughter. It's that Jaden Lower was placed in a situation where he was not prevented from killing my daughter.
As you mentioned, really heartfelt words and very empathetic words from a lady who's just seen, a court case about the death of her own daughter. Now, just to recap on that, so we've now got a situation where both prosecution and defence have come together and agreed that we're going to accept a not guilty plea.
That's right, by reason of mental incompetence.
That's right. So off the back of that, if my understanding of this is right, it means we get a limiting term, as you mentioned, and that term is a life term.
Correct.
And that's in treatment, not incarceration.
That's right. Can be in a facility, in the community, combination of both.
Okay. I would normally think that that's all there is to this. There is a piece of this, though, that, and help me understand, if I'm understanding this right, I believe Michelle's mother, Andrea, was able to read a victim impact statement.
She was.
Now, help me understand this, because my understanding is when we get to a not guilty verdict, that's kind of the be-all, end-all. We don't move to a victim impact statement situation. We've seen that in other cases, and the Reese Watherson case was one of those. We not guilty, therefore no victim impact statement. So why in this situation were we able to do that?
Because you've got to remember that the objective elements are still a part of this. That
Right.
whole concept that an act that would have been a crime, had you been mentally well enough to recognise that what you did was a crime, has been committed. Because there was those acts, that means there are still victims to be discussed.
Sure.
And therefore their next of kin should still get to talk about it.
Okay.
But it's a controversial point of view.
Yeah, it certainly seems to be.
Well, Jaden Lower's lawyer certainly thought so. Stephen Milstead actually said, look, if we're going to have victim impact statements, I want them suppressed.
Okay.
He didn't believe that the victim impact statements, which he had read prior to the hearing, and we're, by this point, August 7th, 2020 now, we've moved on to yet another hearing, subsequent hearing. Mr. Milstead said, look, I've read the victim impact statements. They don't accord with the court's ruling on my client's mental state.
Right.
They seem to talk about him as a criminal, and he's not. So we don't think those victim impact statements should be out in the public.
Okay.
If the family want to say them here in court, fine, but they should go no further.
Okay.
Now, I obviously did not like that. So I stood up and argued that the statement neither prejudiced the proper administration of justice nor dealt undue hardship to Lower, which, as we know, are the tests required under law for suppression. I also said that any report of the case would accurately reflect the court's ruling, so it's in the public interest that the Foster's family's words be heard.
Right.
Thankfully, Justice Sam Doyle agreed. He said, "I'm persuaded by the advertiser's arguments. It's plain to me that Miss Foster was an important and much-loved person in the lives of her family. They are understandably still grieving and coming to terms with their profound state of loss. I'm the judge. I will know what's relevant to determination of limiting term and what's not. I don't need to have my hand held. I don't need things to be suppressed."
Right.
So as a result, I think we've done a pretty good job in this podcast of telling you all what the law is on this situation. Therefore, I have no hesitation in giving you what Andrea said in her victim impact statement.
Yeah.
She gave this statement while holding photos of her daughter and a bunch of sunflowers, which was Michelle's favourite flower.
Yeah.
She said, "Lower, you've stolen my baby. You've left my entire family with a lifetime of mental health problems. I still don't believe someone could be that cruel to another human being, to a woman. It's a cowardly act. My heart is broken and my mind is shattered. This is my pain forever." She said, "I understand that you're mentally incompetent. I understand that you're not guilty as a result of that. But that's no excuse. Mental health is not an excuse for murder. Murder is murder. There is no excuse. You are a bad human being, and there will never be forgiveness for you." At that point, Lower, who was watching on the video screen again, broke down in tears and wept.
Yeah.
Such a hard moment to see on all sides. Lower crying, the Foster family crying, Justice Doyle saying, "I impose a limiting term of life and I order that you be detained for the foreseeable future in James Nash House." That's the maximum security facility. That's effectively saying you're still dangerous.
Absolutely.
You are still floridly psychotic, entrenched schizophrenia.
Yes.
And until a grip is made on that, a dent is made in that, until you start to understand this is not a simulation, you can't go anywhere. But what a horrible moment to have to weigh up.
Yeah.
Because we've said it ourselves during this broadcast. There is no excuse for what happened to Michelle. None at all. But legally, it's not murder.
Yeah. I just want to go back a step as well, because Andrea's comments, again, so well structured and so, as best as you can, understanding in that moment of extreme torment and just turmoil and grief through that process. And she's quite right to say, you are a bad person. You stole my baby. You have taken that away from me. And yet, at the same time, be able to say, I recognize you are mentally incompetent of this. That's truly admirable for someone in that circumstance to be able to have that understanding foresight. I'm going to suggest there are probably listeners right now going, I understand we're talking about mental incompetence. I'm not accepting that. He's still done that. It's still a crime. It's still murder. That I recognize that position and that perspective. And my point is, if our listeners or some of us have that state of mind or thought process, how amazing must this lady be to be able to recognize that in that moment of her own grief, to be able to differentiate those situations.
If it helps anybody out there, Jaden Tane Lower is a killer.
Yes.
He is not a convicted killer,
No.
but a killer.
Yes.
That doesn't mean he is legally and lawfully a murderer. He will be watched for the rest of his life.
Indeed.
To ensure that this cannot happen again. There is, I can tell you through anecdotal evidence, no chance of him coming out of custody anytime soon.
Absolutely not.
None at all. This is not a case where we have to worry about him walking the streets in the next 6 months.
No.
Where someone's going to sign off and say he's healthy. Because he's a victim too. He's a victim of a psychotic illness that is not his fault, of a system through which he fell the cracks, of a situation that he never wanted to be in himself, and he has committed an unforgivable act as a result. He will be punished.
Yes.
and suffer from his own victimhood and his own actions for the rest of his life. And in a completely different way, so will the Foster family. This is like the end of Romeo and Juliet. All are punished.
Yeah. I want you to, if you can, elaborate a little bit and just, I guess, give some roundness or context or whatever we want to call it to this. There's a couple of points you made, and I want to call them back because I think they're really poignant points that our listeners are going. There's going to be division here. I feel there's going to be division around this.
I can feel it coming through.
And absolutely. And one point you made was he is a killer. He is not a convicted murderer. I think that's going to be a very tough and bitter pill for people to swallow. Talk to me about that one first.
That's something that I hang on to when it comes to these mental health cases, where I'll be human here. When I don't feel sympathy for the person,
Yes.
when they have caused their own mental illness by virtue of drug-induced psychosis, when they refused help, when they went out of their way to make sure that they couldn't be found, or when they did everything in their power to allow their situation to worsen, if I don't feel the same level of sympathy, I will remember that they are still a killer.
Yes.
History will always remember them as a killer. There is no getting away from that. They don't get away with it.
No.
There's no insanity defense.
Correct.
That suddenly means you're back out on the streets.
No.
That doesn't happen. So I will hang on to that in those circumstances. But when there is a sympathetic situation, and I do feel sympathy for Jaden Lower, then I remember, well, you are going to be labelled as a killer for the rest of your life. You could have avoided that fate, and so could have your victim had something else come in and been involved.
Yeah. Appreciate that. The second point I want to talk about that you mentioned was he himself is a victim. And that is something, and a victim of an affliction, a mental condition that he had no recourse to want or bring on himself. It wasn't drug-induced or alcohol-induced in that sense. He didn't ask for that, but he was burdened with that. And through the circumstance we said in the cracks and that environment, he himself is a victim.
And I hope people out there feel some empathy for that.
Yes.
Because he's not a person who went and made it worse.
No.
He's not a person who didn't understand what was going on. In his lucid moments, he reached out for help.
Yes.
And that hand was not taken. It was not reciprocated.
Yeah.
That's a victim to me.
I agree. With that stated, we want to once again just remind you that if anything you have listened to through this has been distressing, or you know of someone who you believe or think may be in a vulnerable state, please make use of the available resources either in your area, if that's interstate or internationally, or certainly locally. The ones that we talk about here through the South Australian Government is the Mental Health Triage Service on 131 465. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to provide advice and information on mental health emergency and crisis situations. And the Acute Crisis Intervention Support Line on 131 466. If you have someone in a vulnerable situation, they will call on your behalf and they will check on them and guide them and help them through that process.
And if this episode hasn't made it clear to you how helpful that can be, please rewind and listen again.
Yeah. This episode, Sean, has definitely given us a different perspective. And I asked everyone at the start, get your canvas out and your paints and get ready to paint a different picture. I hope this has provided that landscape that people could paint a different picture and get that colour by numbers aspect out of murder, guilty, criminal aspect, because it's just not that simple.
No two cases are ever alike, but especially no two 269 cases.
Correct. With that in mind, the next episode we bring to you is going to just highlight that like never before in a different way yet again. And then we're going to change the element where we're going to bring a number of them together to talk about what happens when someone thinks they're ready to get released.
Such a vexed question. We saw a little bit of that with Michelle Chamberlain and her sister Vicky Wagner. We're going to deep dive into that on our next episode.
But until then, we just want to thank everyone who has listened to the show, either on our broadcast with 5AA or through our podcast on iTunes or Spotify. Please go rate, review, do whatever you can. Help us. Do what you can. We hope you love our message and our work, and we want you to help us by getting us out to as many people as we can who might benefit from hearing our message. And the way you can do that is to do that subscription and rate and review piece for us. If you want to get in contact with us, of course, we're available at Just Lawful Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, at Just Lawful Pod on Twitter. You can, of course, as always, follow Sean and Adelaide's True Crime News through The Advertiser at Sean Fuster on Facebook and Twitter. And lastly, as always, we just want to remind you to enjoy our work, but don't become our work. And we'll speak to you on the next episode of Just Lawful.